Well, ladies and gentlemen, today we have a distinguished speaker, very distinguished. Colonel Mark Johnson, USA retired, currently serves as the director of the Professors of Practice program in the College of Engineering and a professor of practice of industrial distribution at Texas A&M University in College Station, Texas. He serves as the faculty advisor for the Society of Women in Engineering. He was the Fraternity Advisor of the Year for 2020. He received the Outstanding Faculty Award in 2014 and 2021. Colonel Johnson was a member of the Senior Executive Service, Flag General Officer, equivalent for federal government employees, from August 2008 to September 2011. Colonel Johnson serves in the U.S. Army from May 1979 to June 2008, and he commanded units from platoon to brigade level. He retired with the rank of colonel. Mark is a class of 78 graduate of Texas A&M with a bachelor's in science degree in business administration, marketing, as a distinguished military graduate. He is also a 1991 graduate of Central Michigan University with a Master of Science degree in administration. And he is a 2002 graduate of the U.S. Army War College. El Paso ASQ Section 1401 is honored to have distinguished speakers in our monthly conferences like Colonel Mark H. Johnson. I'm sure you will enjoy his presentation with the topic, The Battle of Gettysburg, a lesson in leadership and logistics. Enjoy it.
Thank you very much for that very nice invitation or introduction there. I just regret that my mother-in-law was not here to hear that. So I appreciate the opportunity, ladies and gentlemen, to speak to you tonight. This is a class that I created several years ago. I've modified it several times. It kind of gave two things for me. Number one, I have a love of military history, so in engineering, I don't get to teach that very often there and stuff. So I found a way that I could combine that, but then talk about leadership and logistics and how things that went well or didn't go well had the impact on that battle, but more importantly, how leaders of today can learn from that to not make those same mistakes. So again, please, if you have any questions or anything, let me know. Can you see the screen, the slide all right?
Yes, sir.
All right.
Yes.
I'll go ahead and get started then.
Over 3 days, across these ridges and fields, through these woods and creeks, drought, or die.
Colonel, is this supposed to have audio?
Do you not have audio?
I'm not getting any. I don't know if the
Okay,
rest
hold
of
on.
it's very, very low.
All right.
Thank you, sir. I don't know if it helps. We could barely hear the audio, so I don't know if it's a volume thing, but
Like I say, yeah. We try it again there. Apologize there. See.
Over 3 days,
Audio any better?
these ridges and fields,
Slightly.
creeks on this ground, or will live or die.
Yeah, we lost the audio again.
All right. But
It's
All right.
okay.
purpose of this presentation is not to refight the Battle of Gettysburg. I would love to do that, and but I understand that not everybody is that interested. So I'm using the Battle of Gettysburg as a backdrop to emphasize the logistics and the leadership aspects. And again, both led to success in battle and in business, those two areas. And that's why I decided to focus on that. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
good.
we can hear you great. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
And again, I use it as a background of those two central themes of logistics and leadership. And I'll talk about the battles there and everything, but again, the emphasis is on not all the details of the battle, but those lessons that we can learn and apply to our current business lives. Again, talk about the purpose, some keys to success in both battle and business, leadership, principles, challenges, the battle itself, who were the opposing forces, technology in the Civil War, logistics in the Civil War, talk about the Civil War soldier, days 1, 2, and 3 of the battle, Lee's retreat, the results, and then parallels for today's business leaders. And then my closing thoughts. As we go through this, keep these principles in mind as you're listening to my presentation. The importance of strong leadership, having well-trained people, proper utilization of all your resources, a good understanding of the environment that you're operating in. The emphasis is on the execution, not just the planning. How do you leverage technology? The importance of good communications. And in both battle and business, it's a team sport. Again, a leader exercises his or her influence using several of their own personal traits. Their communication skills, their ability to make decisions, their planning skills, their willingness to accept personal responsibility, their motivation, their confidence, and their vision. Gettysburg, what were the leadership challenges? General Meade, the new commander, had been in command less than a week. General Lee, 2 of his 3 corps commanders were new. In fact, even within the Confederate side, there was a disagreement on how to fight. General Lee wanted to attack. General Longstreet wanted to find a position and defend and let the Union forces come to them. And then on that day 1 of the battle, after the death of General Reynolds, there was no senior commander for the Union side. For logistics, in business, it's a movement of products or goods and services from point A to point B. Transportation and warehousing. The overall supply chain is a network of businesses and organizations working together in a series of processes to produce and distribute goods. In the military, it's a transfer of personnel and material from one location to the other, as well as the maintenance of that material to be able to support a deployment or respond to threats as necessary. In battle, successful logistics is getting the troops and supplies to the right place at the right time and at the right quantity. In business, getting your products to the right place in the right quantity and at the right time. Distribution is the key to success in both business and battle. At Gettysburg, Union had a very well-established logistics. The Confederates, very poorly organized. They basically had everything back in Virginia, had to come from Virginia to Maryland and then into Pennsylvania. They depended very heavily on what was called foraging, which is basically taking from the local citizens whatever you need in terms of livestock, other foodstuffs. The need to control roads was very important. And you'll see later in a map, several roads all go through Gettysburg. And so that's why it made Gettysburg such an important thing for both General Lee and General Meade so that he could control the movement of his forces. And that was part of the reason that they even invaded the North again. They had invaded the North, the Confederates, in 1862, which ended at the Battle of Antietam. But the Southern farmers, basically, most of the battles in that time of the Civil War were fought in Virginia. So the Southern farmers could not grow or harvest their crops. So the intent was, let's move out of the Virginia breadbasket, go into Pennsylvania, fight on their ground, and so that we can give our farmers an opportunity to recover and grow some local products. So what makes a successful business battle plan? And then what makes a successful business plan? Clear objectives, both in battle and in business. Why are we doing this? What is the intent? Good intelligence, the environment, the opposing forces. In business, who are my competitors? What's the market like? Good leadership from top to bottom. It's not just good enough to have the commanding general or the CEO be very good. It's got to be everybody else from him all the way down to the lowest leader, both in battle and in business. Clear vision of what does success look like, and then once we've accomplished that, what next? Too often you see in history there that they capture the objective, then it's like, okay, now what do we do? And so knowing once you achieve that, what's your next step, and then how to get there, both in battle and in business, are critical. Proper execution. Planning is important. No battle, no business was ever successful just because they had a better plan than somebody else. It's the execution of that plan that is critical to the ultimate success, both in battle and in business. And then again, logistics. We've already talked about the importance, but again, both in battle and in business. So you see, in both battle and business, the keys to success are often the same. Key leadership principles: know yourself and seek self-improvement. Make sound decisions. Set the example in all that you do. Know your people and look out for their welfare. As I was telling my students today, don't forget the golden rule of leadership. Take care of your people and they will take care of you. And that's, I tell you, that's important both in business and in warfare. Keep your people informed. People want to know what's going on. Even if it's bad news, they want to hear it from their leader and not hear it from somebody else. When you assign tasks to others, make sure they clearly understand those tasks. They're supervised and then they're accomplished to achieve the overall goals and objectives for the organization. You train your people as a team. So what are the leadership challenges? For the Union forces, they had basically a small standing army at the beginning of the war, and most of that was on the western frontier, dealing with the Indians, or on the East Coast, making sure that the British or somebody else didn't invade. General Meade was the 5th commander of the Army of the Potomac in less than a year, and he's only been in command for 3 days, and he's about to go into the most important, the decisive battle of the Civil War, and he probably doesn't fully know everybody in terms of his subordinate commanders. General Meade. And the Union Army's in the midst of a losing streak. Okay, they lost the Battle of Fredericksburg in December of 1862, the Battle of Chancellorsville in 1863. Basically, every general showed great promise, but little results. A lot of political unrest in the north of the Potomac or in the Union because the war had gone on much longer than people anticipated. It had cost more in terms of lives and in money. And there were people in the north that kind of said, hey, let's just have two countries, let them go. And within the Army, there was a lot of turmoil because with 5 commanders in less than a year, certain people like this commander, they don't like that commander, so there was a lot of internal strife for the Union Army. Confederates also had a lot of leadership challenges. They obviously had no standing army at the start of the war because there was no Confederate States of America until April of 1861. Lee had been in command for 13 months, okay? He had never lost the battle, never been driven from a battlefield, but he was reorganizing the army, and I think probably to a degree he was overconfident. Even though each of his battles, his forces had been smaller than the force that they defeated, he felt that it didn't matter the size, my guys can beat anybody. General Robert E. Lee. Again, that lack of logistical support caused for foraging. Now, the Confederate Army tried to do well. They would either pay these farmers for the items they took using Confederate money, which basically had more value in the outhouse than of trying to go to the bank. Or they said, you know, at some point in time, we will pay you for this. So basically, they took it. For the Confederate Army, this is the first time they haven't had that home field advantage. They've been fighting in Virginia for the most part. The people knew them, they knew the area. The local populace was supportive of them. Now they are in enemy territory and they lose all of that home field advantage. They needed a big victory. France and England were kind of sitting on the sidelines trying to decide, are we going to recognize the Confederate States and come in in support of them? They were a little hesitant, and the thought was that if Lee could win a big victory, that would cause them to make the move. Challenge is for both sides, a lot of these officers were political hacks. They were elected by the officers. They didn't have any training, skills, or experience. And one of the positive things that came out of this was in 1862, Congress passed the Morrill Act, which said that each state in the Union would have a college that taught military science, agricultural science, and mechanical sciences, basically ag and engineering and ROTC as we know it today. And for Texas A&M, that's important because we are the land grant college for the state of Texas. So that was one of the things that came out of that, that A&M was a result of the the Morrill Act. So basically, this was a war between amateurs. And again, as you can see, Gettysburg, Maryland, Virginia. It's about 60 miles from Baltimore to Gettysburg, almost 90 miles from Washington to Gettysburg. Does that sound any better?
I cannot hear anything.
All right, well,
1863.
it's a short video.
100,000 are dead, and the Civil War is barely half over.
I can hear something now.
Okay.
Now, General Robert E. Lee aims to move the war from Virginia and win a major battle in the North. He hopes to stoke the fire of a growing peace movement. His 75,000-man Army of Northern Virginia moved swiftly into south-central Pennsylvania. Union General George Gordon Meade and his 95,000-strong Army of the Potomac toward Lee. He concentrates his army where 10 roads converge. Gettysburg. Lee's move north will spark the largest battle in American history. It will last 3 days. Battle starts west of Gettysburg. Union General John Buford's cavalrymen shoot at lead elements of Confederate General Henry Heath's division before falling back as Heath advances. Buford holds near Gettysburg until General John Reynolds' First Corps arrives. Infantry against infantry, fighting intensifies on both sides of the Chambersburg Pike. As the highest-ranking Union officer on the field, Major General John Reynolds escalates the battle as he desperately tries to support Buford. Ordering a Wisconsin regiment forward, he is shot in the back of the neck, killed, just as the battle begins to escalate. Confederate General Robert Rhodes' division arrives on Oak Hill. Though his division is twice the size of his opponent, Rhodes' initial attacks are poorly coordinated and repulsive. Then, General Jubal Early's division arrives from the northeast. Despite Union reinforcements, Rhodes and Early managed to break their right flank. The Yankees are fighting a losing battle on the left, too. After a savage firefight in Hurst Woods, they fall back to Seminary Ridge. Cannons and small arms blast the attacking rebels, reinforced by Dorsey Pender's division. But numbers come to bear, and the Union line collapses. Some escape via an unfinished railroad bed. Others are trapped in Gettysburg streets. The defeated Yankees reform on Cemetery Hill, where General Howard has left a brigade and an array of cannons. The Confederates probe, but do not attack. It was one of the bloodiest days of the war, but the worst is yet to come. By the afternoon, the Confederates have wrapped around the Union position, which now resembles a giant fishhook. But the Federals occupy the high ground, and General Meade's interior lines will allow him to easily reinforce threatened sectors.
Just kind of review again, if you didn't get to hear all the volume, good example of Lee's overconfidence is, even to that day, most military doctrine will tell you if you are the attacking force, you need to have a minimum of 3 times the size of the force that you're attacking. And you can see in this case, the Union Army was at 95,000, General Lee was at 75,000. And even though on the first day, they had the greater success and they considered to have won the day, a lot of missed opportunities, a lot of disjointed operations that prevented them from completely carrying the day. And at the end of the day, the Union forces still maintained the high ground at Gettysburg, which meant that the Confederates were going to have to go up to attack them. And so now it sets up the second day of the battle, which is going to be even bloodier than the first one.
School is back, and Dick's Sporting Goods has what you need.
Just to give you an idea of those opposing forces, Regiment's about 800 soldiers commanded by a colonel. A brigade is 2 to 5 regiments commanded by a brigadier general. 2 to 4 brigades would make up a division commanded by a major general. 2 to 3 divisions would make up a corps, commanded either by a major general or a lieutenant general. Confederate Army again is about 75,000. Union Army about 95,000. So you can see there's already a mismatch before the battle has even begun. Civil War is considered the first technological battle in history. Weapons had increased accuracy and lethality. Most of the doctrine was based on the Napoleonic tactics, which basically said most weapons had a maximum effective range of about 100 yards. So basically you line up your forces, the other guy lines up his forces, you shoot at each other until somebody says that's it, and then they retreat. Now in the Civil War, the range is about 3 times as much with a high degree of accuracy. So this is a great example of where technology has outstripped tactics, and that's why you had such high losses during the Civil War. It's the first time you're actually going to use railroads to move soldiers from point A to point B. Now that worked very well in the North, but in the South, basically each state set up its own railroad system with its own gauge. And if you know about railroad gauge, either the narrowness or the wideness of a track determines that gauge. So that if I was coming from Georgia, I couldn't necessarily just go to that next state. I might have to offload all of my personnel and equipment, load it up on another train. So it can be a very slow, laborious process. Air Force finally shows up. You have balloons that are now being able to raise those above the line so that you can see what the other guy is doing. Telegraph, although Samuel Morse developed it in 1845, this is the first time that you see it on the battlefield. Not necessarily talking from unit to unit, but for the leaders of the country could talk to their senior commanders. And you have the first submarines and ironclad battleships. The Battle of the Monitor and the Merrimack was the first time you had 2 ironclad battleships that fought it out. Medical treatment was a lot better. It's still pretty primitive in terms of if you're shot in the arm or the leg, the normal procedure is to amputate that to save the rest of the body. You compare that with today's medical technology on the battlefield, it's probably 90 to 95% success or saving of a wounded soldier because of the ability to get them to the right medical service quicker, and then the technology. First time you have wars, you have people like Matthew Brady, Alexander Gardner that took pictures. And why were these important? They were then presented to local newspapers. And so the people on the home front for the first time actually got an idea of what was going on the battlefield, the carnage and the others. And again, technology outpaced the tactics, and that's why you had such high losses during the Civil War. Logistics. It's basically the industrial North versus the agricultural South. South was very heavy dependent on imported or captured goods to wage war, whereas the North had its own logistics, its own factories, manufacturing capabilities. Troop movement, though, was still by boot leather express. Marching as far as you could, and boots is almost a misnomer because the shoe they wore was called a brogan. And basically it was a one size fits all. So if you get lucky and it's close, you're good. But if it's too small or too big, that just adds to your pain and frustration. Beans and bullets. How you going to feed these large armies when General Lee brought his 75,000 up? He couldn't stop at a Cracker Barrel and ask for a go order or go into a Whataburger and say, I need 5,000 number 2, I need 15,000 number 1s, but cut them, hold the mustard or whatever. So again, this foraging became very important. Green corn and apples as they were marching along is what a lot of soldiers were surviving on. And again, I talked about the movement of using trains. For the Confederates, weapons went anywhere from a 44 up to a 58 caliber weapon. And if any of you are gun people, you know that you might can fit some of those different size bullets into a different rifle, but it's not going to be effective and you're going to lose the accuracy. And again, that barred or locally procured foraging was very critical. They also use wagon trains, but the problem with wagon trains, especially for the South, you could barely feed your soldiers, but now you've got these horses and mules that you've got to feed, and they can't survive on just grass alone. So that just adds to more frustration, and they're very vulnerable to attacks. Day one, the battle again.
Battle starts west of Gettysburg. Union General John Buford's cavalrymen shoot at lead elements of Confederate General Henry Heath's division before falling back as Heath advances. Buford holds near Gettysburg until General John Reynolds' First Corps arrives. Infantry against infantry, fighting intensifies on both sides of the Chambersburg Pike. As the highest-ranking Union officer on the field, Major General John Reynolds escalates the battle as he
I'm going to skip that since we've already gone over that one. Basically, again, the day one was a Southern victory, although the Union still controlled the high ground. For the Union, it was basically 3 hots and a cot. They had a tent, they had a place to sleep, and they were going to get fed 3 meals a day. They had a very well-established supply chain, shorter distances to cover, and that industrial infrastructure and their interior lines, which made it much easier for them to move supplies and equipment and to move people from one side to the other. Confederates, scrounge around and sleep on the ground. Not really a good way to take care of 75,000 soldiers because they had no really established supply chain. And what they had was all the way back in Virginia. And that lack of industrial infrastructure meant that they either had to capture it, steal it, or wait for France or England to import it to them. And since the Union Navy blockaded most of the east coast of the South, it was very difficult to get those things in and very costly. And I said, their breadbasket had been depleted by the early fighting, and that foraging becomes so critical. Talk about day two. Nope.
July 2nd, 1863. July 2nd, 1863. Daybreak. The Union Army has established a strong defensive position resembling a fishhook along Cemetery Ridge.
Sound any
Against the
better?
advice of his second in command, James Longstreet.
I can hear it.
Yes.
Yes, we can hear it.
Thank you. Flanks of the Union line. Longstreet leads the Confederates on the left, with fierce fighting taking place at Little Round Top, the Wheat Field, Devil's Den, and the Peach Orchard. On the Union right, Richard Ewell leads Confederates on an all-out assault on Colts Hill and Cemetery. The rebels reach the crest of Cemetery Ridge, but are unable to hold their position in the face of the Union counterattacks, including an almost suicidal bayonet charge by the 1st Minnesota Regiment. By the end of day two, and despite heavy losses on both sides, the Union defenders managed to hold their lines.
All right, so Confederates win day one. Union Army is basically won day two because their leadership performed much better. Confederate efforts were very disjointed. Basically, Lee tacked on the left, tacked on the right, was unsuccessful. This sets up the day 3. He decides, okay, I've gone to the left, I've gone to the right. It's high diddle diddle up the middle. Again, majority of these soldiers on both sides were farmers or worked in stores before the war. They went from being illiterate and basically could not even sign their enlistment papers to college graduates. The University of Mississippi had a whole company of their students that fought for the Confederate Army. Although most were native born, you had immigrants on both. For the North, predominantly of German, and in the South, predominantly Irish. Average pay, $12 a month. And that was for, if the Union Army, pretty much you were going to see that $12 every month. For Confederate soldiers, didn't know when and how much and when they would receive it.
This is Sean. He represents 1863's ultimate fighting machine. He's a soldier in the 87th Pennsylvania, fighting to keep the Union together. And he's on his way to Gettysburg. He wears a heavy wool uniform. It's going to make things tough in the July heat. His cap is also made of wool with a leather brim. The brass hardware on the top shows the unit he's part of. Leather straps across his chest fasten his canteen, ammunition pouch, and his pack. Brass fittings hold it all together, along with a badge that symbolizes the Union he's fighting for. Sean carries his world on his back, a bedroll, rations, and eating utensils. He also has a sewing kit, extra clothes, his wallet, and a journal. Most importantly, Sean carries his 1853 Enfield rifle as his primary weapon. The age of the muzzle-loaded rifle is coming to an end, but not quite yet. Sean still has to go through a painstaking and dangerous routine before he can fire at the enemy. First, he bites the top off of a paper cartridge and pours the gunpowder down the barrel of his gun. Then, he drops down the bullet. After that, he uses a ramrod to jam it all down. He still has to cock the gun's hammer, pick a firing cap from a different pouch, and secure it. When he pulls the trigger, the hammer strikes the cap, sparking off the powder in the gun's barrel and propelling the bullet more than 300 yards with great accuracy. Union soldiers like Sean execute this entire process in less than 20 seconds.
You know, it's kind of interesting. He does it in 20 seconds. Well, nobody is shooting back at him. And there's lots of cases where soldiers would put 2 or 3 rounds down in their haste, or they would leave that ramrod in and then shoot that down range, and then now they're unable to reload their weapon. The other interesting thing is what the dental requirements were for a soldier in the Civil War. Anybody want to guess? 4 teeth, 2 up, 2 down. Why?
Wow.
You had to be able to tear the cartridge. So if you did not have those 4 teeth, you were not going to be a soldier in the Civil War. Confederate soldier looks a little different. Everybody always thinks that the Confederates were in gray and the North or the Union was in blue. Confederates were kind of a combination. This color here is called butternut. It was a very cheap dye that they could take material and provide some uniformity to their uniforms. But they would also use captured Union uniforms. And you can see British Enfield rifles and captured items there. So much less organized and uniformity amongst the Confederate soldiers. But again, great fighting soldiers on both sides, despite the challenges. In battle and business, the important thing is your people. You can always get more things or stuff. You can't always get enough more people. And so you've got to make sure that they're well taken care of, they're well led, and they're prepared. As I said earlier, the golden rule of leadership, take care of your people and they will take care of you. Third day.
July 3rd, 1863, 1 p.m. Confederate guns begin the largest artillery bombardment of the war against Union defenses. Determined to press the attack, and despite protests from General Longstreet, Lee orders a massive infantry assault against the Union center. At 3 p.m., General George Pickett and his 12,500 Confederate soldiers step from the ridgeline and advance on Cemetery Ridge. Union artillery and muskets open fire, killing half the division. During Pickett's charge, Union General George Custer leads an attack that prevents the Confederate cavalry from attacking the Union rear. That night, in heavy rain, General Lee withdraws his decimated army back towards Virginia. He tenders his resignation to Jefferson Davis, but is refused. Gettysburg was a turning point in the American Civil War and marked the Confederacy's last major offensive.
Again, so now the Union has won the second day of the battle. They win the overall battle. Pickett's charge, 11 to 12,000 soldiers. Over half of them became casualties in less than an hour, including several generals, colonels, and key leaders that Lee was going to need if he was going to continue the war. This just gives you an idea. This is from the movie Gettysburg about Pickett's charge. Just shows you how large it was and how devastating it was. You can see how tightly the Confederate Army is marked or packed in there as they go in. It's about a mile from where they started to the Union lines. Small element of the North Carolina regiment actually gets to the top and seizes a small area, but there's nobody to reinforce them, and they're quickly captured or killed there and everything. So again, you see that rail fence that was supposed to have been taken down prior by the engineers. They failed to do that, and that caused a bottleneck. And as you saw there, as the people were lined up, artillery concentrated on them. Lee's lost the battle. For the first time, he has been driven from the battlefield. Is he going to quit? Is he going to give up? he decides that I'm going to take my army back to Virginia and live to fight another day. The thought was that on the day after 4th of July, they had good positions and that the Union Army would attack them and they could return some of the favor to them. But General Meade and his forces had pretty much fought out too. So basically, the night of the 4th, Lee had to start the retreat. He had to get his surviving soldiers, he had to get his casualties, he had to get those captured Union soldiers, he had to get all of this livestock that they had taken from the from the Pennsylvania farmers back to Virginia. And he's lost almost all of his key leadership. It's either dead, lying wounded on the battlefield, or captured by the Union Army. So at the most critical time, really in this whole battle, is when General Lee really shows his true leadership by the way that he gave very simple orders and directions. You're in charge of this, you're in charge of this, let's get going, and they move back. Again, the Union Army, though, was not just going to sit there and wave goodbye and say, hey, we'll see you next time. So they were in pursuit of that. And again, these long wagon trains over 20 miles in length with both the supplies and then the wounded. And it was in a torrential rain and the roads quickly became quagmires of mud. So many challenges that Lee could have just given up and said, that's it. But he truly showed his leadership.
Lee has lost, but remains on the field. He hopes to repulse a counterattack on July 4th to even the odds. Meade does not take the bait. That night, Lee pulls back through the mountains to the Potomac River. His lumbering wagon train of wounded is miles long. Meade plans to attack, but Lee's river position is too strong. The Army of Northern Virginia, beaten as it had never been beaten before, moves back into Virginia. And the war will go on another 21 months.
So how well did General Lee and the Confederate Army do? Successful. He brought everybody back. Over 40,000 of those soldiers that had not been casualties, brought them back. 8,500 wounded, 45 miles of wagon train, 20,000 horses and mules, 30,000 head of cattle, and 25,000 of sheep. Confederate people were going to be very needed of this equipment. But his army is still in bad shape. His soldiers have not had shoes or good clothes for several months. And these horses and mules are in desperate need of good feed and to be shoed themselves. And for the first time, Lee's been defeated. But the war continues for 2 more years. This does not end the Civil War, but it basically means that the Confederates are never going to be able to invade again, and it's now just a matter of time before they lose the war completely. Leadership and logistics combined to accomplish this mission of bringing his army back to Virginia despite overwhelming odds and challenges. 51,000 plus casualties, total of 23,000 for the Union Army, 28,000 for the Confederates, and many of those wounded were probably going to die within weeks or months. So you can see this was a very bloody battle. And then again, it did not end the Civil War, but it completely changed, and that in a matter of less than 2 years, the Civil War would be over. So we've seen lots of good things, lots of bad things, commanders on both sides. So what are the parallels for leaders today? Clear objectives, and each of your subordinates must understand what their objectives are and how achieving their objectives leads to the overall success. Even if you have a great plan, don't forget the enemy competition always gets a vote. You've never seen a football game when one coach tells the other, so what's your game plan? Oh, I didn't think of that. Man, that's a good game. I tell you what, we're just going to go ahead and get back on the bus, get something to eat, and we're headed home. They play the game. And just like in business and in battle, you must carry on. And just because you have a great plan doesn't guarantee success. Too often we overestimate our own capabilities and underestimate our competition. They're competition for a reason. Don't overestimate or underestimate. Be clear in the orders and guidance that you give. You cannot be ambiguous. You've got to know the environment or market that you're operating in, both the weather, the terrain, and who else is operating. You want to maximize your advantages while minimizing the advantages of the other guy. And then finally, remember, it's not the plan that ensures success. It's the execution. Make it happen. Question there, do you think that General Lee lost the Battle of Gettysburg, or did General Meade win the Battle of Gettysburg? Any thoughts?
Based on
You know,
what you just told,
General Lee
Lee lost
lost
it.
the battle.
You know, two great leaders, two great armies. Bottom line is, for all the mistakes, the lack of coordination and cooperation by the Confederates, the Union Army did cooperate. The leadership did show strong leadership. So again, it was that General Meade won the battle. He and his forces accomplished what needed to be done. Again, didn't have clear objectives, overestimated his capabilities, certainly underestimated the opposing forces, and his leaders failed to properly execute their orders. Whereas General Meade and his, they did do that. Proper execution and strong battlefield leadership ultimately won the battle. Leaders in both business and battle often find similar challenges. Decisions have consequences. In battles, your mistakes can cost lives. In business, it can cost you money. We can learn from the mistakes and successes of the great leaders in history. Question is, are you going to learn from the past, or are you going to make those same mistakes? The choice is yours. Good luck in the future. Again, thank you again from Aggie Land. Any questions? All right.
Thank you
There's
for
my-
a good presentation.
Good, thank you. There's my contact information. If anybody likes to, like to further discuss, or any other questions there and everything. Again, I appreciate the opportunity. I wish you and your organization continued best wishes and success. And thank you for including me in your meeting tonight.
Colonel Johnson, the question, it looks to me like the Confederate method of scrounging and sleeping on the ground and making do with everything around you was replicated in the Philippines in World War II.
Yep.
The forces there they tied up just innumerable Japanese forces by just being pests.
Yeah. And again, there's examples of history that goes just the opposite way. Like you were saying, the better organized, the better equipped doesn't always carry the day there and everything.
No.
But in this particular case, that lack of logistical support and the lack of strong leadership from top to bottom combined, that even though Lee and his forces were outnumbered, given their past history and other battles, that and there were several chances during the 3 days battle that they could have won, but they kept snatching defeat from the jaws of victory, and whereas the Union forces, they did step up to the plate. they did coordinate, they did execute their missions. And so again, is that, stuff alone is not going to do it. The bottom line to me is logistics becomes a good foundation that you got to have. But the ultimate success, be it in business or in battle, is going to be what kind of leadership and what kind of leaders do you have. You need them both, but I think ultimate leadership is the key to success in most anything.
Yes, sir.
So I had a question. So
Yes, sir. Yes,
I'm a huge
Sergio.
yes, sorry. I'm a huge history buff, and I've seen the movie that the experts of that at Gettysburg. So a lot of the information that I've learned from, also told us that the South had very good military academies, particularly the Citadel, and they was producing very good leaders. What happened to these leaders? In fact, they were praised for having better leadership than the North at the time. What happened?
They died.
Okay.
That was part of the problem. You're exactly right. Between VMI and the Citadel and West Point, because basically West Point trained officers for both sides.
Correct.
Some went north, some went south. But so many of the key leaders on the Confederate side were killed in earlier battles. And so in a game of attrition, if you would, whereas the Union Army could produce and provide replacement officers, on the Confederate side, they weren't as successful. And so you started seeing the cases of, you happen to be a rich guy, Sergio, and so you go and raise a company or a regiment of forces, and you go into battle because you were able to spend that money, and you may or may not actually be a good, strong leader. And so that initial strength at the end, unfortunately, started getting watered down as key leaders were lost in battles. In classic example is General Jackson is killed at the end of the Battle of Chancellorsville by friendly fire.
Wow.
There's a lot of stories that, the what ifs. If General Jackson had been at Gettysburg, would it have turned out differently? Would he have done different things? I mean, it makes great, beer talk. But I think, I think it's just a good example of when the South did lose those key leaders, they just couldn't replace them at the same level or at the same rate that they were losing them.
Right. Thank you very much. Appreciate your comments.
All right.
Excellent presentation. And I love the way how you brought up, currently, about our leadership and stuff like that. Again, this guy, probably History Channel, one of my favorite channels all the time. Every time I'm looking at the great leaders that this country had, and what has been the downfall for some of these, I'm gonna call it capital empires, it's when leadership changed, when leadership, wasn't able to fulfill what I guess the people that initiated these companies had this vision of making them great, and I love how you refer to that with the civil. Very good, excellent material, and I hope the students appreciate this because we don't learn from history. We're bound to repeat our mistakes again, right? Which exactly what
Sergio, you're exactly right, and that's why I use this, because again, it's different than any other lesson they're going to get, and so I always hope that because of that difference, the message though gets through. And you bring up a good point to kind of finish up there. Is you're right? Is I think a lot of these huge corporations that started off and were very successful, they kind of lost their vision. What are we all about? And as I describe it, they forget the why. Why am I in business? Why do I do what I do? And so I try to always stress that with my students is you always start with your why, because if you know what your why is, that gives you focus and purpose in everything you do, because everything leads back to that why. And so you're not going to be disjointed or all over the map, or you chase this good ideal and then you chase that good ideal, and ultimately you run out of resources or things to chase. So, and again, so I've discovered, like I say, is certainly the cost of doing business in battle is much higher importance than in business, but the basic principles I think are often the same. And it's like I always remind people, things need to be managed, but people need to be led. And that's not just a
Right.
subtle difference between words. Is that again, given I want a leader. I don't want a manager.
Exactly.
Very well spoken. Exactly. Wow. Thank you very much. I really enjoy your presentation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Orful, thank you very much for the opportunity. I appreciate the invitation.
Well, Mark, thank you for giving us all these concepts, very valuable concepts in reference to leadership and logistics. And it's impressive, how these concepts were implemented in 1863 and it's still valid in the current business, right? With many corporations. So all these concepts that you listed, that needs to be performed properly are still valid everywhere, and it's amazing how CEOs from corporations have lost the compass and don't use these concepts, to manage the business.
I think we sometimes get too focused on all the technology and all the new things, but it's like Daryl Royal used to say is you dance with the one that brought you, and that's kind of the same concept. Is what got us to where we are. That concept doesn't just go away because there's new technology or whatever. Now, certainly, yeah, you've got to make some modifications and stuff, but there's a difference between modifying and doing away with.
Exactly. Well, absolutely, this is the essence of leadership and logistics and can be implemented everywhere in all kind of businesses. So thank you for sharing, these valuable concepts again, okay?
Thank y'all. Thank
you.
y'all very much. Again,
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
continued
sir.
success, and
Thank
please
you.
let me know if I can be further assistance.
Thank you,
Thank
Mark.
you, sir.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank
Bye.
you,
Bye.
guys.
Good night, everyone.
Bye.
Excellent. Good
Bye,
night.
guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay. Let me save the chat if I can.
Okay. So that's it, right, Jack?
Yes.
Okay. All right, Maurice, you're gonna take care about the minute?
Yep.
Excellent. You're doing a great job.
Yeah, I've been sending out some emails. Hopefully you've been receiving them and able to read them.
Yes, we did. Excellent job.
Okay.
All right, gentlemen, I'm gonna turn off my Zoom, and thank you for everything. Enjoy your week.
Okay.
All right. You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.